Welcome back. It is Chris Nichols here with PetaPixel, and in this hand I've got an iPhone 15 Pro Max, and in this hand I have a Nikon Z8. In which scenarios and situations does this do better than this, and vice versa? Where's the crossover as well? So today's video is all about educating on whether this is the right choice or whether this is the right choice in many different scenarios. Now, in order to dodge a whole series of comments later on and questions, I know you guys are going to say, well, what kind of leather goods are going on here? So first off, yes, this is a old man case. I like these with the cards on the side, storage, this tooch little wallet thing for my phone. So don't judge me. And then on this side, I've got Wotancraft wrist straps because I love these things. Peak design, attachment. These are fantastic. So obviously we don't have apples to apples here, right, in our comparison. So I know. So I'm trying to make this as close as possible. So on the Nikon Z8, I've got a 24:120, and that's because on the iPhone 15 Pro Max, I have a main camera that starts at 24 millimeters, then I get a 28, a 35, a 48, and then I get a 120 millimeter range. So, you know, the kit lens is to cover this. Now, what about the ultra-wide camera? Yes, obviously, I'm not shooting an ultra-wide lens on the Nikon Z8, but this does have the benefit of multiple lenses. We can get that right out of the way. I mean, that is going to be a huge advantage for an interchangeable mirrorless platform like this. But every time I take a shot, I'm going to do my best to stick to those focal lengths. So I'm going to go out here and I'm going to try to mirror every shot. So here, I'm going to go to 120 millimeters, bam, take a shot. Then here, I'm going to try to do the exact same thing just to try to keep things as similar as possible. With the iPhone 15 Pro Max, we're shooting HEIF files. You can choose JPEGs, but HEIF is the default file format, and it's compiling multiple shots. When I push the shutter, the phone takes multiple pictures, different exposures, combines them all together. There's some real advantages there. Now, the Nikon Z8 also does give you the option to shoot HEIF files. I can go into my image tone, change it from SDR to HLG color space. You'll actually see the histogram compress a little bit. We get more dynamic range, and there's gonna be more room to push and pull those files. Now, when it comes to RAW, well, we have an interesting story there too. So classically, on a mirrorless camera like this, RAW files are gonna give me the most ability to push and pull exposure, change white balance and color. On the iPhone 15 Pro Max, I can also shoot RAWs. They're 48 megapixels, which is excellent as far as resolution goes. And these also are going to give me the room to push and pull, change color, that kind of stuff. However, the iPhone 15 Pro Max is doing RAW files, again, with multiple photos compiled together into a RAW image. So we talk about iPhone 15 Pro Max versus something like the Nikon Z8. We talk about shallow depth of field for portraits. So one thing with the iPhone 15 now that's really nice is if the camera detects a face, even on a pet like a dog or sheep, it will give you the option to then choose if you want shallow depth of field after the fact. And of course, with something like Nikon Z8 or any other mirrorless camera, I have to use the aperture that I think is going to be appropriate to give me the shallow depth of field. And I really do have to make that choice at the time of taking the photograph. It is important to understand one thing about smartphones though. When we're doing this shallow depth of field, smartphones don't actually naturally give us shallow depth of field. So you are going to basically be faking it by using things like the portrait mode. Now that is nice because you could do a wide angle shot with a wide angle lens and still get shallow depth of field if you want, because it's kind of a digital process. Whereas with something like the mirrorless camera, when I go to the 24 millimeter on this lens, even at f4, I'm still getting a fair amount of depth of field, and I can't change that in camera. That being said, in any of these situations we're talking about, getting portraits of animals, getting shots like that, once you learn how, it's really not hard to adjust your depth of field with the aperture on these lenses. And I still far prefer the natural look of depth of field versus some sort of faux, fake bokeh effect. Now on the iPhone 15 Pro Max, you can shoot 24 megapixel files when you're using the main camera, when you're using the 28 millimeter or the 35 millimeter lens. But do keep in mind that when you're shooting the ultra wide lens or when you're shooting the telephoto lens, you're back down to 12 megapixels. Also, you can get 48 megapixel files, but that's just with the main camera, the 24 millimeter focal lengths. So that does get quite limiting when you want to shoot other focal lengths. Whereas of course, on a camera like the Z8, doesn't matter where I'm zoomed in on my lens, I'm gonna get the full 45 megapixels. So I do think having more megapixels on a camera is usually a desirable thing, but it really does depend on your output. Smartphones do so well because if you're just doing output to Instagram, social media, you know, on a web page or something like that, you just really don't need that many megapixels. It's not that important. But if you are going to go into something like print, or if you want to crop heavily, or if you just got a scene like this beautiful vista where you got tons of detail and you really want to capture that, then megapixels are important. And that's where a smartphone is going to have a distinct disadvantage. Also keep in mind that if I wanted to go even more telephoto than what a smartphone can do, I know we're not talking about it outside the context of this video, but I can always put on a larger telephoto or an ultra wide lens on a camera like this and still get 45 megapixels. With a smartphone, I'm out of luck. So one big advantage that a camera like the Nikon Z8 has over a smartphone is we can sync it up with flashes. We got our Westcott FJ400 here. It's strong. It can work in direct sunlight like this, but it's still very uncomfortable for me, the model. I can barely see the camera right now. I'm probably squinting pretty heavily, and it's still gonna put a shine on my face. So Jordan's gonna bring in the Westcott Fast Flag. Jordan, did this take you a long time to set up?
It took me almost no time to set up, Chris. It's very fast.
So there you go, much nicer light as you can see now. So here you can see the shot without the Fast Flag, and now we bring that diffuser in and it just looks far more even. You can also get solid black or different strengths. You can get negative fill, as well as use a reflector. Very versatile, very easy to transport, and very quick to set up. Okay, so a scenario where a good mirrorless camera is basically gonna beat out a smartphone every time is when it comes to shooting action and sports and you want quick shots. So with the iPhone, the first thing I find is, of course, pressing a button, whether it's on the side or tapping on the screen, is never gonna be as ergonomic as having a shutter button. But also, I find it difficult to get the exact moment I want. I find that the iPhone honestly catches the moment before I push the shutter. That's good if I'm a little bit slower, if I'm, you know, having a difficult time trying to get the timing. But if you're a more experienced photographer and your timing's good, you're actually gonna find that quite frustrating. So what I find when I'm trying to capture that key moment on an iPhone is that I'm actually using the burst mode a lot. And to the phone's credit, it actually bursts really fast. You know, RAW slows it down a bit, but it can sustain burst rates for a very long time. And so that's a great way to make sure I got the moment. But then I do have those photos in my phone storage. I gotta clean that up after. It's a little bit inconvenient. Whereas on a mirrorless camera like the Z8, I get great burst shots. And after I'm done, I just pull off the photos I like, format the card, and forget about it.
All right, it's very relaxed, Jordan, to talk about the different video functionality between an iPhone and a high-end mirrorless camera like the Nikon Z8. And let's be honest here, I mean, in most regards, having a huge sensor is a bigger benefit for video than it is for photos, because you can't just stack a whole bunch of images to make up for the lack of image quality. So, you know, when we're looking at the log recordings between the Z8 and the iPhone, I mean, the iPhone is unbelievably impressive for how small that sensor is, but it's still not going to compete with a full-frame sensor. You can especially see it here in the shadows. The one area where the iPhone has a real advantage, though, is in terms of stabilization. Because it is a small sensor, it can move it around incredibly rapidly and has excellent stabilization that looks very smooth when you're panning it around in its default mode. But the real difference here is when you switch over to the action mode. It does incur a pretty significant crop, but the results are the best video stabilization I have ever seen out of any piece of gear, whether it's a mirrorless camera or a smartphone. I actually shot it side by side with a Nikon Z8 in its sports mode, and you can see the iPhone quality isn't as good, but the stabilization is vastly superior on that. But overall, a full-frame mirrorless camera is giving you better dynamic range, much better low-light performance, and significantly better ergonomics. So if you're serious about video, it's still a far better tool. Oh, that's Jaron. I do a podcast with him every week. You should probably listen to it.
Okay, so we've had a chance to take a look at our files here. We've got some conclusions now about image quality that I just really want to get into. Now we're comparing it. So the first, Michael, we're trying to record a bit here, man. We're trying to get our image quality. Could you maybe make the coffee later? I'd appreciate that, you know, when we're not rolling. Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Sorry, that's Michael, our traveling barista. We take him with us everywhere because we need our coffee, but not while we're recording our image quality talks. Anyways, where was I? See, first off, why do I have two computers? Well, I've got my Nikon Z8 files here on my PC, and then I'm looking at the iPhone files on Jordan's Mac, and that's because I want to be able to see the HDR representation on his HDR screen properly, as well as be able to see side-by-side comparisons. So, you know, here's the first thing I'm going to say. When we talk about the actual detail and resolution of it, the Z8 is going to win pretty much every single time. Obviously, when we're talking about the ultra-wide angle lenses, the telephoto lenses, and then the crop 28 and 35 lenses at 24 megapixels, of course the Z8 resolution is just going to outperform. Now what I will say is the main camera on the iPhone 15, even though it's such a tiny sensor and a tiny lens, just by combining all of those images together, when you've got good light, it's actually quite impressive how much detail the iPhone 15 Pro Max can deliver. In some cases, it's almost comparable. But as the light levels drop, that's where we run into issues on the iPhone 15 Pro Max. I mean, the noise reduction kicks in, detail gets really soft. Even if you're shooting 48 megapixel RAW files, you can see side by side there's a huge difference here, and a camera like the Z8 is going to easily outperform it in those situations, and that is to be expected. But where I was actually really impressed with the phone versus a mirrorless camera is when it comes to dynamic range. It is truly impressive, and again, the phone has the advantage of being able to stack multiple exposures across multiple images to really build this full dynamic range in their files. Again, I'm not going to say that they're on par. A full-frame mirrorless camera like the Z8 will still have slightly more dynamic range, but it is slight, and that's truly impressive. You can see here as well that what the iPhone does so well is create files right out of camera that look rich, vibrant, and full of detail. Whereas on a mirrorless camera, I do have to work on them to get them to that point. Now, if you are a full-frame mirrorless camera user, you expect that, and you might even enjoy that whole process. But I can absolutely see the benefit of being able to take my phone out, shoot a very difficult scene as far as lighting and contrast goes, and then get a file out of it that already looks finished. Thanks, Michael. I'm sorry I yelled at you earlier. All right, so one of the main issues I have using the phone here is ergonomics. That's still a problem, right? Not only getting the timing for trying to get portraits at the right moment without having to burst, and certainly also things even just like angles. I mean, trying to shoot high angles above or low angles on the ground, it's just very difficult to see the screen. So I still love the ergonomics of using a smartphone. So, we're going on this trip here in Idaho. It's probably one of the most beautiful states that I've ever actually seen in my entire life. And I've obviously used smartphones to take pictures before, but it's always been a capacity of just capturing memories. So what was different about this trip is, first off, we're seeing gorgeous light, beautiful saturation of color naturally. And what really impressed me about the iPhone 15 Pro Max is that I'm taking shots with this phone and it's capturing all of that dynamic range well. It's capturing the tones. It looks the way I'm seeing it with my own eyes. And it's really quite beautiful. So from that standpoint, I would say it's the nicest image quality I've seen to date out of a smartphone that I've used. But I'm also going to say this. When looking at the files close up, it's not going to be a camera like the Z8. And of course, I mean, we're talking wildly different price points. We're talking, a very expensive lens on the Z8. And of course, the potential to then add other lenses that I need to. So to say that we're going to be looking at image quality comparison, it just doesn't make sense. What I would often find is I would use the iPhone, take a picture of a scene and say, wow, that's stunningly beautiful. I'm gonna then pull out the Z8, make sure I replicate that so that I know I have a file that I can really work with, that I could print out if I wanted to, that I could crop heavily if I wanted to, that I could shoot in a low light scene if I wanted to. I still think for me it really comes down to your output. I mean, we're here in Idaho, we're trying to get photographs for commercial purposes, and I want to have full manual control over that, and I want to be able to really work on the files afterwards. And even with third-party apps like Halide and stuff, there's still no comparison to what I can do with the Z8. But I think at the same time, if your commercial purposes were for social media or for websites where you don't need that large output, I could certainly see how a creative could come out to a place like this, just use an iPhone 15 and actually get stunningly good photographs that will work fine for specific commercial purposes. So regardless, we got two very powerful tools, and it's really going to depend on your output. So as I've always said, when it comes to photography, it's about the right tool for the right job. The iPhone 15 Pro Max in the right situations can be a powerful tool, absolutely. And hopefully this video helps you guys see where those differentiations might work and then what would be best for you. As always, please leave comments below. Let us know what you think. Do also check out the podcast. I mean, it's a lot of fun. It's on this same YouTube channel, or you can find it on all your favorite podcasting apps. Just look for PetaPixel Podcast. We appreciate you joining us, and we'll see you soon for more episodes on PetaPixel.